Hello, hello. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Ranger Station. We're about to start our next presentation / panel discussion called Reducing versus Offsetting Sustainability and the Supply Chain. Our goal here is to demystify the supply chain and give you the tools and resources you need to take your business in a more sustainable direction. I'm going to hand the mic off to our moderator, Annie, who's the Director of Sustainability at Peak Designs, and I hope you guys enjoy the conversation. If you have questions after, please hang around. Our panelists will be more than happy to discuss anything, and we hope you guys enjoy it.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you for swinging by. Really quickly, can I get a raise of hands for who was at the OIA Sustainability Luncheon? Okay, not too much. Turns out that a lot that we were going to cover in this panel was addressed there, which was great, and we're just going to roll with it here. So yeah, I'm Annie Nyborg. I'm the Director of Sustainability at Peak Design. Thank you so much for coming. Again, we are going to be discussing supply chain and sustainability here. Before I kind of launch into what we'll be covering and get going, I'd first like to have our lovely panelists introduce themselves. So if you guys wouldn't mind giving your name, where you're from, and maybe just like a quick overview of kind of what you're doing, what your oversight is.
All right, I'll go first. So my name is James Rogers. I'm Director of Sustainability for the North Face. We're based in Alameda, California, in the San Francisco Bay Area. In one sentence, my job is to do anything I can to reduce the environmental impact of the organization. But it's a lot more than that. It's looking at our supply chain, like we're going to talk about today, but also things like employee engagement, educating our teams, various teams, our merchant team, our sales team, our product teams, about sustainability initiatives as well.
Hi, everybody. My name is Adam Fetcher. I'm VP of Environmental Impact and Policy for a company called Asko Finlayson, which is a small but growing outdoor company based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. My job is really to lead the company's mission, which we call Keep the North Cold. The brand really embodies the identity of the North. Minnesota is unique in spirit, grounded in cold winters, committed to hard work and creativity. And our goal is really to bring that perspective, that point of view, the northern point of view, to our audiences as we grow into a national and hopefully global brand. So my job in Keep the North Cold, our model is about climate accountability. We measure the carbon footprint of our entire business, from the raw materials in our supply chain all the way through our operations. We calculate the social cost of that impact in economic terms, how it relates to people like you and I. And then we give away 110% of that amount every year to support solutions to the climate crisis.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jesse Daystar, and I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at Cotton Incorporated. So my role there is actually really to work with all levels of supply chain, all the way from a grower with really planting cotton all the way up to getting it into brands. And actually after that too, what do we do with it? And how do we make that more sustainable? So it's a really diverse job working with a grower, fashion, and then even a waste industry. So it really keeps me on my toes. And I come at most of these kind of conversations with a life cycle assessment perspective, really measuring the environmental impacts in a very scientific way and making decisions based upon data.
All right, and I'm Beth Jensen, and I am the Senior Director of Sustainable Business Innovation for Outdoor Industry Association. So thanks to those of you who were at our session earlier today. We were launching our first sustainability benchmarking report for the broader outdoor industry, and these folks sitting here are all part of the industry collaborative group that's really working to address shared supply chain issues that are really sustainability issues in social and environmental causes in the supply chain. So I help run this group of about 200 companies that's been coming together for over 10 years to work on these shared supply chain issues. How many of you are members of the Sustainability Working Group right now? Anyone? Perfect. We got a live audience here. So if you're not already a member, you can really learn from your peers in this group, and so I'm happy to talk with you more afterward about the group and getting involved.
Thank you, guys. So a little background in how I was thinking about this discussion today. We at Peak Design started our sustainability journey about 2.5 years ago. And it was primarily me spearheading that and I do not come with a background in sustainability. So it was really trying to learn on the fly what tools existed, and the best path forward and the best strategy moving forward. And it was a very daunting, confusing process. I knew we wanted to do a lot and we didn't know how to get there. And so, I've learned a lot, and I think there's been a lot of improvements in the last couple years in terms of resources available to companies that want to do this to make it easier. But I wanted to use this discussion to surface a few best practices, and tools that our seasoned experts can, recommend specifically around the supply chain, which is such an enormous part of our impact as product companies, as well as talk about some of these bigger, higher level ideas and issues. And so with that, I'm going to kind of warm us up with a big one, which is, I think we get into the weeds a lot of the time with this work, and I'd love to hear, from all or some of you, how do you define sustainability? In other words, what does success look like as a brand or as an industry? What is this work moving towards ultimately?
All right, I'll start. I'm definitely going to hand it off. I think in terms of sustainability, mostly right now we're focusing on reducing a negative impact. We're trying to do less bad with our products or processes. The future, I think, is doing more positive benefit from your products. It sounds like you guys are already kind of doing that from a financial perspective, but actually weaving that into everything you do. You hear regenerative agriculture is kind of a big buzz phrase these days, and frankly it should be, and moving towards those systems that are not based on fossil fuels and that also can help regenerate the planet to draw down carbon or build soil health. I think that's really going to be the future of sustainability. But that term sustainability truly implies just kind of no impact. It's kind of doing something that you can do forever. And really, we have to get to the point where we're making up for the negative impact that we've already done.
I think the term sustainability sometimes gets meant to mean something kind of green or pie in the sky, or even looking at it through the goal of having no impact whatsoever. Really what it means is sustaining the business, and therefore it is, part and parcel of what it means to have a successful business. I like to think about sustainability in terms of what would it mean to have a successful company, over a course of 100 years or 1,000 years. What does that require? What it requires is a mutual benefit between the company and the stakeholders that are touching that company at various touch points, throughout the world that it inhabits. So, we are asking ourselves for sure, how can we reduce harm? That's the number one thing, and companies can and should be looking at how to do that, in every decision they make. But then again, I think as you said, moving towards the benefit whenever possible. If you can do that in a regenerative way, like growing a crop that has regenerative properties and sequesters carbon from the atmosphere, that's incredible. But if not, I think that's why it's still important to hold yourself accountable for the remaining impact that you're not able to reduce. Because again, sustainability is about creating a benefit for the business and for all the stakeholders that are involved in it.
Being in the cotton industry, my industry really touches millions and millions of people, so small growers all around the world. So there's a real human component to the cotton industry. And kind of touched on the three pillars here now. We have the environment, the business, and then the people too. And really making sure that we enable them an opportunity to have money from their growing operations, make sure they can do it safely and sustainably for the environment. And that is really important. And the cotton industry is really focused on regenerative farming. We have a goal to increase our carbon in the soil carbon by 30% in the United States by 2025. And we see how important that is. And that comes back to the handprint. You have your footprint, you need to reduce that, you need to have your goals and your strategy to get better. But then you also need to think about, how can we make this a better place? How can you engage brands? And I'm really trying to focus on how can we make a system where brands can engage with growers, not only to make them, growers, more sustainable, but also to help the brands offset what they need to do. So I think it's a really big thing to work with, but always keeps me busy and entertained.
So I'll close this discussion by just pointing out the fact that all three of these guys had a different definition for sustainability. And I bet if I asked you and you and you'd all have a different definition for it as well. And this was actually really the grounding of the sustainability working group. 10 years ago, our industry recognized that we had all these different definitions for what sustainability even means. So how are we supposed to be able to understand what a best practice is without coming together to establish those best practices and standards and so forth? And so that was really the impetus of the sustainability working group in general. But at OAA, we actually wish we didn't have to use the word sustainability because it does have so many different meanings for everybody. So that said, it's the closest thing we have right now, but we really consider it's good business practices in your supply chain. It's making products better with less impact or ideally no impact, and then ultimately looking to the future and looking at, we're having discussions around, have we reached peak stuff at this point? Like, does anybody really need more? Are there more materials that actually even need to be made down the road? And how do we use the materials that are already in play to continue creating new products and innovating, using the products that are already out there, creating services that are based on these types of new models, like really thinking into the future about the reality of supply chain limitations. And so anyway, sustainability equals best business practices or better business practices in the supply chain from our view as an industry.
Great, thanks guys. And kind of going off of that, I'm really excited to talk about some of OIA's tools and other resources that are available for brands that are specifically looking to get into supply chain stuff. But while we're kind of talking about this, in regard to what does sustainability mean, and the thoughts around trying to have no harm, reducing harm, trying to make amends for the harm that we've done. The title of this panel was offsetting and reducing. Years ago, offsets were this new, exciting idea, where we could get an offset and offset some of this negative impact we've been doing by purchasing offsets. And that came under attack for a few reasons. There was questions around, are offsets even valid? Do they do what they're supposed to be doing? I don't know why it's... And then there was also, a lot of people are, just paying for their sins without really getting to the root cause of the issue. But I think now, we're coming back around to this idea of, offsets. There are many excellent offsets. Offsets have, there's a lot of great options out there. And the fact that, we are product companies, and to have no harm is, at this point, virtually impossible. Like, we're gonna have an impact on the planet because we're product companies. And so, at Peak Design at least, we have gotten really excited about this prospect, and we have conducted a carbon emission analysis of what we're doing, and we are purchasing offsets from day one all the way to today to try to offset those emissions. And so I'm curious about your thoughts on these, everybody, in terms of is this a practice we should get behind? More than just reducing, more than just looking at our supply chain and the reduction lens, where do offsets play a role?
I'll leave this one to the brands, actually.
I think, well, first of all, I'll just say that I think companies that are doing offsets for their carbon impact are absolutely on the leading edge of the business community in terms of holding themselves accountable, taking responsibility for their carbon impact, potentially other types of impact as well. So I really applaud the use of carbon offsets. Here's the problem I see with capital O offsets, and this is sort of a blanket statement. I know there are offsets out there that are better than others, so bear with me. But I think the presupposition of offsets is that if everyone did them, then we would solve our problem. But the truth is, not everyone's going to do them. In fact, only a very few companies will take the initiative to do it. We wish it was different, but that's sort of the world we live in, and climate change is literally burning down on us as we speak, and so the problem is urgent. So I see opportunity, instead of doing sort of offsets, which is to essentially neutralize your impact, to actually invest in solutions where you're looking at problems that are being solved in a way that can be scalable without requiring business leaders that unfortunately are sticky on this issue and are very profit-minded and focused on quarterly returns and hard to move towards sustainability. Where we can make change without necessarily having every company in the world do offsets. So I think investing in sort of the crucible of work on energy and agriculture, educating the next generation on climate change, to me, that represents a really, really great opportunity to sort of get outside the box and provide a better investment for your dollars in terms of holding yourself accountable.
Real quick, show of hands, who thinks they know what an offset is and understands the definition? Okay, so maybe we should just explain that a little bit.
Good idea.
I'll give just a very simple example. So the idea is that you have carbon emissions from your operations, and in order to offset those emissions, you pay for a project that actually sequesters carbon. The easiest example is tree planting. So as that tree grows, it's increasing the carbon content inside the tree, drawing it down from the atmosphere, and you can do calculations of the number of trees you need to plant to offset your emissions for a particular project or a particular year. Therefore, your emissions are offset. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about offsets. For the North Face, we definitely use offsets, and we believe it's a tool. It's a means to an end, but it is not the end itself. We kind of have a multi-step process around our climate strategy, and that's first just measuring your emissions in the first place. And that's actually probably the hardest part. We have to, we have a big enterprise-wide accounting system that we use, and that gives us kind of our baseline. Then the next step is to do anything you can to reduce your emissions. So we have a 1 megawatt solar system at our office. We have a big solar system at our distribution center. We do a lot of energy efficiency initiatives. Then at that point, when you feel that you have gone as far as you can, at least in that given year, you offset the remaining emissions. But really, you're only offsetting them knowing that your goal is to not have to do that eventually down the road, that you've reduced your emissions so much, you're using renewable energy, you're investing in other projects, that you don't have to pay for those offsets down the road. And then there's also what some people are calling insetting, which we were talking about this earlier today, is there's varying definitions. The one I kind of see or use is doing offsets, but specifically for the communities that you touch. So that might be what you guys are doing, where you're doing carbon offsets, but you're doing tree planting where your supply chain is, where your factories are. So you're benefiting the communities where you're actually having your operations, or maybe it's near where your business operations are, near your headquarters. So that's another way to also look at it, and kind of, I would say that's one step further, where you're really looking to impact your own operations in a positive way to offset those emissions.
I think there's a question, right? Did you have a question? Are we cool with questions as we go? Yeah. We can repeat the question too.
Do you know what your emissions were roughly for 2017?
I do, but I don't know it off the top of my head.
I was just hoping to compare some, because we did a great and kind of in-depth study into our emissions, and the most shocking thing that we found out was, for all of Peak Design's basically $13 million in cost of goods sold, it generated about 20,000 tons of emissions. And it is shockingly cheap to offset 20,000 tons. It is $3 a ton in order to do...
And that's including your supply chain emissions
this
as well,
This
correct?
is everything that Peak Design does, and that includes the mining of the aluminum to turn that into raw metal, and every single bit of our supply chain. So basically, everything that it took for us, all the plane trips that we took to Vietnam, all that stuff, and it is shockingly cheap. That is equivalent to 0.5% of our revenue.
I guess. Go ahead.
Well, I imagine that North Face and Peak Design, from a supply chain standpoint, are actually at a very similar scale, use similar materials, similar processes, and I would be shocked if your guys' need for capital output would be any different than that.
Well, it's a good point that I should clarify, because I was actually only talking about our owned and operated facilities and not even our supply chain. We have not quantified all of the emissions in our supply chain. We're actually going through that process right now. Through our parent company, VF Corporation, we've committed to setting science-based targets, and part of the requirement before you even set those targets is you have to measure all of your Scope 3 emissions. For an organization this large, it's almost a 1-year process just to get to the point where we can do that measurement. You could just guess, but we don't want to do that. We want to have a pretty accurate idea, because that also allows us to pinpoint where we're going to have the most bang for our buck in reducing those emissions. So I think it's a good process that we're going through. We're using a lot of different tools like the Haig MSI to look at the kind of profile of the materials that we're using, and MSI stands for Materials
Sustainability Index.
Sustainability
Yes.
Index. So it gives you a profile of your individual materials, and looking at the accounting that we're already doing in our own and operated facilities, but then also we're going to have to partner with our supply chain to get some data from them as well. There's some bigger companies out there that I think are already doing that really well. The one that comes to mind is Nike. They collect a lot of data directly from their suppliers, so they're not guessing that much. I hope that we would get to that point, because then we're incentivized to partner with our supply chain and help them reduce their emissions as well, versus just offsetting or doing something else.
If I can just interject there too, I think it's illustrating the different angles by which smaller companies versus larger companies can approach climate, integrating climate solutions into their businesses and reduction strategies. I think in general, what I would ask you, totally valid point. I think for a lot of smaller companies, try to quantify what those impacts are, and it's not that expensive to offset them. But the other thing I would ask is, have you really gone into exploring, where that aluminum is being sourced from and how the workers are being treated, and where all the impacts are that are actually happening, and addressing those from the start. But then vice versa, VF and North Face's challenge is to quantify the vast network of suppliers and supply chain that they have. So it's like, start where you can and do what you can that's attainable for the place that you're at, and then both ends kind of work toward the opposite, what the other group is able to do, if that makes sense. So yeah.
And another thing to point out too, that sustainability is certainly a journey. Some companies are just getting started and just joining the working groups, and some have been doing this for a while and figured out their scope 1 and 2, but now need to do scope 3. I think it's really important to consider the timing of this. If we wait 10 years to do something, we've had a lot of impact over those 10 years. So maybe while you're beginning this road, this journey, there might be an opportunity to bring a reduced impact through offsets earlier. Meanwhile, you figure it out and you start transitioning more towards actual on-the-ground improvement in your facilities, because the timing really does matter.
Amen.
Well, I was just going to say, do we want to just talk about how not all offsets are created equal as well?
Yeah,
And I think that's a really
another
important thing that we should
It's
talk about.
extremely important, and we actually even have Heather here from Bonneville Environmental Foundation, who deals with offsets and that. Yeah, they aren't all created equally, and there are different verifying bodies that go through different steps and different methodology to measure offsets. And various properties are very important when evaluating which offset you want to go with, such as additionality. Making sure that this offset wouldn't happen unless you were investing in it. So I don't know if you want to go into
Well,
that.
we always use third-party verified offsets, generally up to the gold standard. And I'll give you an example. One of our athletes came to us, and they had gotten to know an offset provider that was kind of new and starting up, and they said, "Hey, I'd love if you guys work with these guys." And I had a conversation with them, and they weren't there yet. They didn't have third-party verification. They probably had some really cool projects, but I wasn't confident enough in the reductions to use that against our business operations. And so it really gives us assurance that these are valid. Frankly, offsets and RECs have been controversial off and on over the last 10, 15 years. And I feel like it's ebbed and flowed. I feel like right now there's generally a high level of confidence around offsets, but that was based on, that had to be built back up. That confidence had to be built back up over time.
So we were just kind of discussing, the North Face versus, peak design, and businesses that have been in place for a while, businesses that are just starting out. There's a lot of benefits to when you're just starting out, thinking about this and, putting it in process early on, because it becomes harder, I think, later on as you do it. And, we were discussing earlier before this panel, I feel like when you're just starting a business, you're just trying to get off the ground. So you're cutting corners where you need to cut corners. You aren't necessarily looking critically at your factories and your supply chain in terms of where, environmental and social standards are. and kind of long term, that can really bite you in the ass. And so I guess, when I started this journey, it was just really hard and confusing. Our supply chain was already off and running, so we're now having to go back and take a critical look at that and try to figure out what we want to do there. I pose to all of you, what is your either advice, best practices as small businesses that are growing to keep in mind, or maybe along with OIA, like what kind of tools would you recommend are the must-haves and the must-sees as you're getting this stuff off the ground?
Well, I can start as another small company that's just on the early edge of our journey. There are definitely huge advantages to starting at the beginning. You can start embedding a deep philosophy into the company DNA, so that instead of having sort of the sustainability team, searching through years of supply chain activity and bringing products to market, you're bringing the cost of your impact into every decision at every level of the company every single day. And that opportunity is really golden, and I think that people who are considering starting companies now or who have young businesses should really deeply consider instituting some strong measures of accountability for their climate impact and for other types of impacts as well early. And I think the advice I would give would be come up with a model that represents a positive benefit from your company. So for us, it's give 110%. It's easy to say, but it means that we are reducing as much as possible, hopefully finding ways of creating our products that do have regenerative benefits, but where we can't, that we're investing in solutions that will have an outsized benefit. I guess I'll say before I close, the flip side is that bigger companies have an opportunity to make really big impacts with every little thing they do. So the scale of the impact is so much bigger. The urgency of the problem is so huge. So anyway, there's pros and cons to being small and large, I think, in this context.
Well, I won't talk more about what to do. I think Beth's going to have some good options for everybody. But in terms of how to think about it, my recommendation would be to really look at who you are as a company and always try to frame it up within your brand. So I'll give kind of two examples that I do for the North Face is, our tagline is never stop exploring. So I always try to frame it up internally and around exploration. If our purpose as a company is to inspire and enable exploration, we can't do that if we're destroying the climate and if we're allowing public lands to be taken away from us. Like, we need those areas. We need constant climate. We need winters. So that's kind of an easy unlock for us to think about it that way. Everybody goes, oh yeah, all right, yeah, we do need to protect the environment. And the other is, for us internally, we pride ourselves on the performance of our products, and we never sacrifice on performance. But sometimes I still struggle internally with cost hurdles moving towards a more sustainable material. So I've been trying to get our product teams and frankly our leadership team to think about sustainability as performance. If we're not sacrificing on performance, we make it happen, then we should be able to do the same thing around sustainability in terms of making our materials have a lower footprint.
Yeah, to kind of build upon that in the performance, sustainability really is performance and longevity and durability of your product. And if you can make that last longer and make the care less intensive, that will ultimately really help the sustainability performance. And then to kind of further talk about picking something that really matters to you as a company and what really fits within what you're really going for, we've worked with several different brands who get passionate about something like soil health. Wrangler, part of EF, they are really big on soil health. And we've worked with them to engage different growers and tell the story and to really work with people on the ground and make a real difference. And that's them having a handprint. And we've helped facilitate that. And that's really something that connects with their client base, and that ultimately creates value back to their brand. So finding something that's a self-sustaining, sustainable project, for instance, and really wrapping your business around that.
Yeah, so the reason that the Sustainability Working Group exists is to support companies like yourselves in these efforts so that no one company has to do it alone. You can learn from your peers. We have piles of free resources in all these different areas, including what we call our Getting Started guides, to help with all of this and to help you integrate sustainability into your business practices and into your strategy. I mean, we really look at this as it's a business imperative at this point. I mean, with REI now, really working with its its brand partners and wanting to have these conversations about instituting these types of standards in the supply chain. The other reason I think we view it as a business imperative is, how many of you were involved in the public lands issues and advocacy around that over the last 2 years? This is the other side of environmental conservation. You as a brand can't be, out there advocating for public lands while on the other hand, paying very little to no attention to how your products are being made that's actually destroying the environment you're trying to protect. So I think we just really view it as two sides to the environmental conservation and being this industry being good stewards of the communities that we're in. Looking at how your products are made is equally as important as protecting the public lands where we use these products. So outdoorindustry.org has a plethora of resources for you, all these different toolkits in different areas of supply chain sustainability, including these getting started guides. So, and my team and I exist basically solely to answer your questions about these types of issues and get you involved and get you looped into your peers who are struggling with the same challenges. So you don't have to do it alone. We host our sustainability working group meetings the day or two prior to every trade show. And so we have a group of 120 of the industry leaders that come in to work through these issues. We just spent all day together yesterday working through all of these issues, and everyone in the industry is welcome to attend those events. Those are free. You just have to come in a day early and commit to participating in the dialogue. So outdoorindustry.org.
I'll just reiterate that. I mean, if you're a small company or even a large company and you came up to me tomorrow and you said, I've just been assigned sustainability, I don't know what I'm doing, like what's the first thing I should do? I would say join the SWG at OIA and talk to Beth. And the other thing that gives you access to is all the other companies that care about this. And it really is a kind of a support network and a family. And I was just saying to these guys even before we got up on stage, some of the biggest benefits for me is just the little side conversations that happen. We're having these meetings all day long before Outdoor Retailer starts, and we'll just have a little side conversation about something that I'm dealing with that REI is also dealing with, and we're figuring out like how we're both dealing with this. And in a couple minutes, we've figured out this problem that if I was just on my own trying to figure it out in between my four walls of my organization, it'd be a lot harder. So that ability to be able to pick up the phone or email or see each other in person and talk through some of those things is also really, really helpful.
Adam, do you want to add
Questions?
Okay, cool. Okay, good. Yeah, I think we're going to open it up to questions. I think we have a mic we can, there we go.
Hi, I'm a creative director with the Outdoor Youth Leadership Academy. And I'll say two things real quick. One, I think sustainability and efficiency should be interchangeable because sustainability is efficiency, and if you're efficient, you're sustainable. And the second, it would be a question of, I'm a designer by trade, I've worked in manufacturing, I've worked in retail, and it seemed to me that was one of the biggest parts of waste, was there was no connection between those three places. That people design over here, and then a factory makes something here, and a lot of times there's not enough communication, and then you end up with waste. And then sales, not really talking to manufacturing. And if you guys at all are looking at that aspect of how to be more sustainable and control the waste.
Well, I'll start with that one. It's definitely an issue in the industry. Sampling and forecasting, accurate forecasting, maybe making too much product that you can't sell. It's a huge issue in the industry. And I think it's probably an issue no matter what size company you are. Some of the ways we deal with that is we have our outlet stores. So if we have dead stock fabric, we actually design specific styles to use that fabric so it doesn't go to landfill, and then we sell that in our outlet stores. So it's maybe a little bit more simplified version that doesn't have all the bells and whistles of one of our other styles, but we're using up that fabric. And then we can charge a lower price to make that more accessible to also move that. That's kind of the types of things we do. We also work with our design teams on marker efficiency. For those of you who don't know what that is, marker efficiency is just the efficiency of the design. So let's say you have a rectangle fabric. It's how much of that fabric you're utilizing when you're cutting out the pattern. I think the industry on average is around 85%. So that means 15% of the fabric that we're all buying, we're not using in product. That's money on the table in terms of efficiency. That's efficiency with dollars too. So it's definitely still an issue. And I think there's still work to be done. There's not like a silver bullet right now to fix that problem.
Those are great examples. I would say another example of this that we're actively working on in the Sustainability Working Group is with things like durable water repellent chemistries, right? So historically, a designer would just sort of apply the bulk apply whatever the durable water repellency chemistry is that they've historically used. What we're really trying to do now is link some of these practitioners, sustainability experts, back to their design teams and provide tools for doing that to say, start to ask the question of, do you really need this water repellent chemistry on this particular garment? And then is that a consumer-facing discussion about, hey, are you actually planning to take this jacket up Everest, or are you planning to walk around the streets in New York City with this? And do you need the same level of performance, really, for those two garments? So it's a systemic problem, I think, that you're highlighting. That is definitely one of the things we're working on and trying to develop tools around these different, and that's just one issue topic of 20 that we're actively working on in the group right now. So you're highlighting a really interesting issue, and I think there's a lot more work to be done on that. And then linking in sales teams as well, to getting them to be able to understand and be able to talk about what the Haig Index is and how brands are using it internally and really make those links. So. Yep.
Can you actually give a really quick rundown of the Haig Index? Sorry, Adam.
Oh,
just because
yeah.
I find it very interesting, and this is a tool that has come a long way in the last couple of years, and I think is kind of where the industry is going in terms of understanding our supply chain. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Quick and dirty version is, this is the shared benchmarking measurement platform for sustainability of products, brands, and factories. That's being used broadly across the global fashion, sport, and outdoor apparel, footwear, and gear industry. So, and it had its start right here at Outdoor Retailer when our Sustainability Working Group was essentially formed in 2007 at OR. Some companies got together and said, we need a common way to define sustainability, essentially. And that was originally called the Eco Index. It's now evolved into this broader tool called the Haig Index that also includes social responsibility concerns as well as environmental concerns. So Haig.org, Higg.org is the name of that tool. And I highly encourage, even if you're not able to maybe fill the whole thing out right now, I highly encourage you to at least familiarize yourself with it, because that's essentially your playbook for sustainability. That's the common reference point that the entire industry is using to define what good practice is in terms of sustainable products and brands and factories. So I think if you take one thing away from this discussion, in my view, it's look up the Sustainability Working Group, first of all, with OIA, and then secondarily, look up the Haig Index and make yourself familiar with it.
Yeah, I'll just say, not only is this industry incredible in that companies in the outdoor space share information, they want to help each other. Sustainability, in your practices are definitely a competitive advantage, but I think we also all recognize that if we can help each other share information through the working group and other forums, we can all be better and we can help solve some of the big problems facing the planet. So I would also say the Haig fits into that, and that it's an amazing tool, a ton of data there available to you to better understand how you're making choices at all levels of the supply chain, including down to the very early design phase. In terms of keeping sort of the various parts of the company on the same page as it relates to impact, I just wanted to share quickly our approach, which is our model of calculating the social cost of our carbon footprint really helps us bring the financial cost of carbon emissions into every single decision we're making, which allows us to then go sort of individual by individual or budget by budget and hold people accountable for improvements in our impact. So you start to talk about the dollars and cents of climate change and your contributions, you can start making improvements, I think, in a more effective and nuanced way.
In the cotton supply chain, efficiency really is sustainability. If you're growing 2 tons per acre, or like, let's say half a ton per acre, and you're putting all the inputs, you're never going to be as sustainable as if you could double or triple that. Some areas triple that. So really maximizing your output per inputs on a farm is certainly the key, number one, to sustainability. If you have something like a drought or bugs that come through and kill your crop, you've put all the fertilizer and all the land out, and that's all had an impact, and now you don't have any product. So we have to protect the yield in order to make a sustainable cotton initially. And then we really work with how do we, within the textiles, how do we make dyeing and finishing more sustainable? So we work with different companies who have different technologies to do different dyes for jeans, for instance. And then also, how can we make more durable fabrics? So we have tough cotton, something that makes the fabric actually last longer, it's more durable, and also waterproof. So other technologies that we help to get out into the market. And then also, what do we do with it? Can we design something that we can reuse for perhaps an insulation? So you can take old jeans through the program Blue Jeans Go Green and make insulation. And actually, the North Face has some in their walls, I believe. When I was out there, I saw it. So really looking at it from the whole supply chain, designing a product initially that has really durable characteristics and that can be recycled or upcycled into something else.
Probably one or two more questions if anybody has a...
Hi everybody. My name is Heather. I'm from Bonneville Environmental Foundation, and we are actually, among many other things we do with the environment around water and climate change, we also provide carbon offsets for North Face and for Peak Design. And I just had a comment about carbon offsets that just wanted to take it back to that for a second, just to ground everybody in what carbon offsets really are, because I think they get thought about. The perception of carbon offsets is very existential, and it's very much like, oh, it's just a certificate, and I've just paid for this thing, and I've paid for my sins, as she said earlier. But if I told you, if you could invest in a project in Africa that provides sustainable forestry jobs to local people and jobs in education, would you invest in that? Probably. If I told you that you could invest in accelerating adoption of EVs by having thousands of EV stations installed in campuses, universities, and large business campuses across the country, you might say, yes, I would invest in that. If I told you could invest in having composting digesters installed that would capture thousands of metric tons of methane, you would probably say yes to that. Well, all of those are real solutions, and all of those are ways to, are projects that then get converted to carbon offsets so that you can measure it against your footprint. So you can invest in those projects and just say you've invested in them, or you can invest in them and also get something to measure against your own carbon footprint. So I think that is the value of the carbon offset, is that it's not just investing in these great projects, which are real projects and real solutions. It's not just getting a slip of paper saying, I've offset my carbon. You're actually investing in real, amazing, on-the-ground projects, and without the carbon market, these projects would not happen. So just wanted to bring it back to that.
Thank you, Heather. That was great. I'm really glad you jumped in with that. Yes.
Thanks. My name is Jess, and I'm with a nonprofit called Fibershed. And on the note of carbon markets, we really see natural fiber as a way to integrate the carbon conversation into your supply chains and into direct relationships. So the North Face actually released a beanie with climate beneficial wool. But I wanted to actually just ask about the Haig Index. Last time I looked a couple months ago, I noticed that the top rated fiber on the Haig Index was glass fiber. And I imagine that's not in maybe apparel as much as other products. And alpaca fiber was either the very worst ranked or very low down, and it seemed to me that that data was really speaking to a sort of bias toward man-made fabrics over stuff, something that comes from the landscape. And I think in the outdoor industry, where there's clearly, an affinity and a drive to be on the landscape, I'm just curious how something like the Haig is integrating and really aligning values with a land base.
Well,
So first, just to clarify, it's a great question. You're speaking about the Material Sustainability Index, which is actually a tool within the broader Haig Index. So just to clarify, the Haig Index is the overall sort of rating platform, or I shouldn't say that, overall set of criteria that define sustainable products. The Material Sustainability Index ranks different materials against one another based on essentially life cycle analysis data, a version of that, to be able to, so that people can make data-driven decisions, hopefully, about different fabrics that they might be choosing. Now, still in development, I'll let these guys comment as well, but that tool, just so you know, is definitely still in development. So it's the best thing we have so far as an industry, and I think there's still going to be some additional data added, a lot of additional data added over as we go along. So I wouldn't, it is what it is right now, but I would, just take that with a grain of salt as well. So.
Yeah, I will echo that. It's evolving, and we're part of the task teams that actually help create and adopt the science for that. And to be even step back a little bit, life cycle assessment, measuring all the inputs and outputs to the environment and how they impact the environment, that science is actually evolving. How we account for water is evolving. And it's not even settled right now, but we have picked certain methods to start within the Haig Index. And one of those things that they have chosen to start with is to look at 4 indicators that are based upon LCA. It's greenhouse gas emissions, essentially fossil fuel or what you call abiotic depletion, water quality, which is what you call eutrophication, and then water scarcity. Those are the 4 impacts. And the fact that we looked at those 4 impacts has some influence to the results. So if you were to start to look at things like biodegradability, all of a sudden things might change. Or there's other things like acidification or ozone. So there's been a selection of indicators, and there's reasons for that. They put a lot of thought into it, but as the science develops, that's going to change, and those results might also change. Another thing, when you're looking at the Material Sustainability Index, MSI, there's 2 ways to look at it. You can look at it by impact, so global warming, energy, and those 4 indicators, or you can look at the 1 score. And for me, as an LCA scientist, I did my PhD on this very topic. Looking at a single score really blinds you to the effects of that. Actually, what's happening? Is it water? Is it something else? And how you translate, how do you compare water that does rain, it does come back, it's renewable, to fossil fuel that never comes back? And the science that describes how do you go from a greenhouse gas over to a single score is not well defined. There's no consensus. And they picked that method as a way to start to make it simple for a designer. However, we are considering, is that the best method to proceed with? Because the science isn't necessarily in support of that 1 single score, in my opinion. It oversimplifies it. I think we need to look at the greenhouse gases and not just a single score that has no units. So it's a complicated issue, and the science is evolving.
I see the Haig as a great starting place. But to your point about the regenerative wool project, that was something that we watched closely and been really inspired by that project. And actually, when we saw that, we started asking very similar questions to what you just asked about sort of the seeming gaps in natural fiber data in the Haig. So I think it's important to ask questions and to pursue additional information. You can add your own analysis to Haig to create a better picture. You're never going to have a perfect picture. You can only work to get more and more accurate over time.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. That was wonderful.